Just as kind of an intro, I'm Jonathan. I'm with WeWork Labs. I work out of the HQ but support teams all over the place. It's my pleasure to be with you today and be hosting. Just as a little sort of housekeeping FYI, we are recording the session so that we can make it available on WeWork Labs Insider later for Labs members to refer to and make sure that they get every ounce of insight and instruction today. As far as how to ask questions, you can use the Q&A. You can see there on the bottom of the Zoom screen how to access that. We'll save questions till the end. Feel free to throw questions in as they're coming up, and then at the end, once we've gotten through the deck, I'll moderate and sort of ask the questions and address them one by one. If you have any issues in the meantime, you can use the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that, but Jeffrey will be focusing on the talk. So yeah, just a reminder, we are recording. Raise your hand. No one is able to jump in and speak right now. Raise the hand just so we can kind of make sure the recording is really solid. And then at the end, we'll have questions. It'll be great. So yeah, so we're about 2 minutes past the hour. So I'll go ahead and just kind of set it up and introduce Jeffrey. So today, obviously, COVID-19 coronavirus is affecting many communities, many cities. And everyone's sort of trying to figure out how to survive, either to start or survive, grow the business that they're running. And the workplace is essentially switching pretty much 100% mobile, or at least a large percentage of employees are currently working from home that can. So for startups, for smaller businesses, figuring out what this means, the impact, how to navigate it well for employers, or just as you kind of continue to grow and handle incoming business or declines in business, managing your employees and keeping those strong employee relationships is crucial. If it's not done right, if it's not planned out and supported, you can really lose your most valuable asset, which is your people. So today it's our pleasure to welcome Jeffrey Bowman. He's the CEO and co-founder of Reframe. He's an author. He has a very interesting background that he's going to share and kind of leverage into thinking through the people operations side of how founders and startup teams can navigate this time. But I don't want to take any more time talking, so I'll hand it over to you, Jeffrey. Please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, and thanks for everyone that's joined the webinar. I know timing is crucial, just given the the era that we're in. So I'll jump in. WeWork community. I've been a member since 2015. Very familiar with the member demographics. So what I'm going to share with you today is going to be a lot of learnings that have transpired either from conversations I've had with clients over the last couple of weeks, as well as conversations that we had going into COVID-19. For background, Reframe is like Salesforce for people leaders. In 2015, we started Reframe, think McKinsey, but for culture, where we help companies not only build better and inclusive relationships, but gave them the playbooks as well as the strategic design for building a better employee experience. And so when you look at this moment that we're in, what has transpired is that we've gone from this idea of having to come in for work to almost a 100% virtual or remote workforce. So I'll share some of the gleanings that we've had an opportunity to be a part of over the last couple of weeks, and as well as share a resource that we're actually going to be publishing tomorrow, but I'll make it available to the network after this call today. So in terms of our overall team, it's myself, Safra Sears, who's our CTO, Eric Zambrano, and Dr. Gupta. And for the most part, this is a team that where we work on a day-to-day basis with clients, helping them solve problems in the workplace. The agenda today, I'll take you a little bit in terms of our why, and why we are asking or advocating for accelerating workplace change, specifically in terms of the moment that we're in. For CEOs or founders, this is an opportunity. Obviously, you've got the public health, but number two issue after public health is human capital management. How do companies and organizations make sure that they make it to the other side? And the only way they're able to do that is with a strong team. I'll share you a little bit in terms of our findings thus far into what we're calling a people ops guide. And when I use the term people ops, obviously not every organization in terms of size and form and fit has a dedicated person that helps focus on people operations on a day-to-day basis. So if you're a smaller team, let's say 10 or less or 500 or less, you may not have people ops, but you do have people leaders. So we'll share some of the findings, early findings with regards to the guide, and then what we're going to do next so that we make the insight and the findings continuous and continue to provide added value to the community. One of the things you hear me talk about is this idea of living in this age of accelerations. Thomas Friedman wrote a book, I think it was in 2015, that was entitled "Thank You for Being Late." And what he talks about is some of the things that, I'm sure you guys have seen the video with Bill Gates where, what is America and what is society ready for and what America and society is not ready for. And so when you think about what's happening and the alarms that went up with Bill Gates via his TED Talk, a lot of things that are not only going to play out with COVID-19, but will also play out in other parts of our businesses in terms of how quickly things are going to change. And because we do have a global ecosystem and network, we're going to be impacted by things where in the past it may or may not have impacted us because of the lack of technology in the ecosystem. So you hear me reference this idea of being in the age of accelerations. And if you read that book, I think it'll be a good resource for you and help you navigate over the course of the next few months. I think the elephant in the room as we talk about this age of acceleration today is COVID-19. But prior to coming into COVID-19, there was a study conducted by a human capital consulting firm that said only 2% of global Fortune 1000 companies were digitally enabled end to end. What we mean by that, digitally enabled from onboarding to exit. We now know, but behind public health, the number two issue is CEOs, is human capital management. But what the COVID-19 pandemic did was it forced organizations to accelerate the digitalization of their workplace, build a remote experience, and try to cope and manage in terms of building a work from home culture. For COVID-19, we see this as an opportunity for people operations and people leaders to modernize the overall employee experience. Immediately you go from somewhat of a subpar digital workplace to 100% digital workplace in most cases, or 75% and above. And this is an opportunity to think about how do you want to build inclusive, but also personalized relationships with your employees. And the enabler to do that obviously is with technology, but before the technology component comes to play, you have to think about strategically how do you want this to work. For many people that are navigating through this, not only during COVID-19 but also post COVID-19, is really deciding on what path do you want to take at this moment. Do you want to be a survivalist? Which is great. It's very short-term focus, but typically is characterized by fear and confusion. And if you have a team of people, that doesn't usually play out well. And oftentimes, out of fear, you're needing this strong business case for change and growth. Is your path sustained? Are you really going to adjust to the new normal or the new market conditions? Are you continuing to revise, what the exit plan looks like? And then the third thing under this in terms of an attribute Are you tentative with the bets that you're making in terms of resources and investments? The space that we encourage people to grasp and is this idea of surge. And with the actual surge is managing the demand pressures, the demand side, and that's people and growth. Shifting to potentially new channels and business models to meet the demand side is a requirement, and rapidly calibrating talent and resource priorities. So that's what we're going to focus on in terms of the path. Is how do you use this moment to surge? And obviously we know how difficult it is just given some of the conditions that are out there from an overall health perspective. One of the things that our subject matter expertise is around this idea of not only human capital management, but diverse human capital management. And, this is critical because when we were looking at, pre-COVID-19 was, okay, for companies and organizations, what kept CEOs up was, how do I attract and retain a much more inclusive and diverse workforce? And so our why was that we, pretty much reevaluated the landscape, and for companies of all sizes and shape, what's critically important is that you're building this this workplace that is inclusive of what we call the new majority. So that's Gen Y, Gen Z, women, and minorities, and what was once referred to generationally, talent-wise as a minorities. It's become the majority. And so the other thing I think was a business case. 10 to 30% of operating costs is spent annually on human capital management. And if your people are leaving or walking out the door at a much higher rate, you got to ask yourself why. And so for us, when we begin to ask that question why, we begin to ideate and innovate around the practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and came up with this idea of a cultural maturity model. And so what we say to organizations is, how do you move from, general pop, diverse and inclusive workplace to a much more culturally mature workplace? So think of it as like Six Sigma, but for culture. Now, the question then becomes, okay, given everything that's going on, how do you seize that moment and all that opportunity? And so we did some research in 2017, and I think it's going to be helpful in terms of this conversation. Why are companies so hesitant to make this change? And part of it, in terms of our findings, was around the idea of the problem statement. Yes, there is the idea of having a much more diverse and inclusive workplace, but I don't know if you guys heard the statement or read the statement strategy. I mean, culture eats strategy at any point of the day. And so what we began to understand more was about the workplace and culture within the workplace. So if you think about the workplace and the spectrum of culture as it relates to social science, there are five, spaces or five areas as spectrums as it relates to culture. There's monolithic. You'll hear founders say, "Hey, we designed a culture based on, how I wanted to, envision the culture." Then there's the idea of multicultural or multiple cultures within the workplace. But where we landed on is that most companies should aspire or set as a hallmark is having a cross-cultural and polycultural workplace. These are the two areas where we go in and we help accelerate change and growth by personalizing the workplace, which gets you to this idea of both cross and poly. How does it work? I'm not going to bore you with a lot of the technical stuff, but typically there's an assessment where we assess the level of cultural maturity from an organizational standpoint. We score them based on attitudes and behaviors, and it gets back to really understanding how your employees' attitudes and behaviors are. Admittedly so, the reason that most companies are 2 to 3 generations culturally removed from the marketplace is because of the lack of employee data, addressable data. Sometimes you hear the word sentiment, but in most cases, you don't have the technology to get that addressable data. Some people have supplemented applications like Culture Amp. And so, these are the things that are required to have a more modern and inclusive workplace. And for people that have those gaps, we close those gaps through both personalized and targeted continuous learning content. And so that in itself leads to shifts within the workplace. So it's more productive, more inclusive as a whole. So this is all the work that we've been doing coming into COVID-19. And 2019, we built a software product that's integrated, that helps scale and sustain workplace change. And rather than build one-offs in terms of an HR technology stack, our platform is integrated. And the reason for that, and I think you'll see as you think about your organization, as you think about building your technology stack, it's important to not only focus on the pipes or the technology tools, but even more important to understand the employees, their attitudes and behaviors, where they're at today, and then be able to have the tools to understand and get feedback from the employees at each stage of that employee journey. And so when you have an HR technology stack that's integrated, you're better able to get, how many people are subscribing, how often are they engaging in terms of the workplace, understanding the sentiment, and obviously, whether it be through exit interviews or whatever the case may be, understanding why people leave. So that then you're able to personalize the content that may get delivered to he or she, as well as personalize the experience from an overall employee standpoint. And so when you think about, where we are today, this presents a significant opportunity because companies are much more willing, given that they're already in the space of digitalizing the employee experience. It's now, how do you build the right strategy? How do you organize in terms of the right structure? And then how do you put the right systems in place so that coming out of this, it's much more sustainable and scalable as a whole? This is just the impact that we've seen from employees who are going into the office every day. And obviously you're going to see some more significant impact given that you have more employees that are working from home. So therefore you're going to hopefully see more engagement from an employee perspective. Now, what we've done, over the last couple of weeks is that we've come together to construct a guide. Obviously, with everyone being impacted, it's hard to go into the offices of clients and provide them with not only the services, but also the software. So what a lot of folks that we've spoken with, what they said is like, I wish I had a guide that not only, helps us today, but it's continuous. So as things change, we're able to pull different things from a playbook. And so what we developed is a people ops guide for, this age of acceleration, because, today is COVID-19, tomorrow's obviously going to be something else. And it's about continuous change and growth and being agile. So our ambition is to help people ops and people leaders with a guidebook that provides a playbook. But not only are we going to talk about what's happening this week, through our channels within the platform, we're going to host curated thought leaders and develop content and findings across multiple industries so that as things change and begin to what we hope will be normalized, so will the content and the playbooks that reflect that moment. Just, early on in terms of, what are some of the key things, and like I said, we'll make this available to folks on the call after the call on tomorrow, April 1st, but we'll release it in a broader context because what we're gearing up for is a content play as well as a playbook play that is going to be continuous on a week-to-week basis. And then we will continue to update the People Ops guides based on the findings from the conversations from the thought leaders. But just, what we typically do, and I think I shared with you earlier, there are 5 areas that we evaluate and going into a project, and typically based on those 5 areas, the software helps to scale and sustain the change that's required for a much more inclusive and sustainable outcome within the workplace. And so, the first thing is structure. Design and build an organizational structure that reflects the desired employee experience. Some would say this is tops down versus bottoms up. And if you're not getting or sourcing feedback from your employees as it relates to their journey and their experience, then that makes it pretty hard for you to design the right structure from an organizational standpoint. The second piece is around segments. Oftentimes when you talk about employees, you have somewhat of a limitation. And this gets into the insight that the workplace is 2 to 3 generations culturally removed from the workplace. And what we mean by that is, if I were in the consumer side, my variables or dimensions in terms of how well I know that consumer, it's usually 10 or more. Whereas in the workplace, it's typically 5 or less, one could argue 2. It's typically race or identity. And so if those are your only 2 entry points in terms of understanding your employees, that can be a problem. And when you are designing the right structure, you're getting a better understanding of the employee journey. Critically important is to source and get feedback. Not only feedback, but develop the insights to how you segment your employees based on attitudes and behaviors. And then becomes, what is the strategy in terms of culture? If we've identified the problem is that it's monocultural, then how do you get it to become a much more cross-cultural? And part of it is because you have the multiple generations in the workplace. And so you're going to need a way to understand those attitudes around this idea of the new majority, because that's, from a talent acquisition standpoint, and obviously depends on the category of business you're in, but this is a generation that's going to be coming into your workplace, and hopefully you're able to retain that as well. We talked a bit about the systems, that's typically where we come in. We advocate for a bundled, so you get transparency. And, there is a hybrid approach to it versus, all separate unintegrated applications. It's, hybrid, out of the box, semi-custom, to where you're better able to get the data in a much more real time and much more transparent, because it aligns to how you're getting and sourcing feedback from the employees across the journey. And then the last thing, what we've seen come out of COVID-19 is partners, or solution partners. And this is an opportunity for you to source, partners within your specific business category that have even a better relationship with talent, because it's a one-to-one relationship, whether it be through B2B content creators, folks that are really on the pulse and really get an understanding of not only your consumer side of the business, but also your B2B side. And so these are things that we're going to amplify for the next 3 weeks with different thought leaders. And that's how we plan to stay engaged and in tune and move at the speed of culture so that it impacts the workplace in a very specific way. I'll take the next 5 minutes and just, kind of share what's next. I think I shared earlier that this is just a starting point for us. We've taken the last couple of weeks to develop the guide. And, the week of 4/6, we're going to, host on our platform a live event as well as publish things within our Reframe blog. But we're going to talk to multiple industry categories as to how they're approaching those 5 areas within media and entertainment, CPG, and we wanted to start on areas that are have high growth acceleration as a result of COVID-19. Media and entertainment, obviously people are online, you've seen video increase significantly. So we're gonna pull 1 or 2 thought leaders from that space and kind of talk about what they're doing across those areas. Consumer packaged goods, obviously with limited opportunities to go outside. I hope everyone is going to get food within their grocery stores. So a lot of the products within there are being impacted in a significant way. And then we'll, tilt a little bit, and hopefully we got some recovery with QSRs, our restaurants. So we'll talk a little bit about how they're managing through it with travel and leisure and retail. Now, the week of 5/11, we're going to host a Reframe Live Change Summit where we'll have different panelists. And then in June, because we would have done a lot of the aggregation of quote unquote research from these different industry categories, we will publish a revised version of the People Ops Guide, and then invite folks to our Reframe Live Change Accelerator. So these are the things that I think are helpful, and we'll publish. Again, we follow a pretty consistent path with regards to structure, strategy, segments, systems, and solutions. And then we'll make content available as well as learnings on a real-time basis. And the other thing that we've done to kind of make sure that we stay present and top of mind and adjust to the audience is that, we've built a Zoom-like feature, or are building a Zoom-like feature within our platform that, drives more engagement within the application and host, conversations with actual customers and helping them accelerate it as well. And then, like I mentioned, we got the event series coming up with the Summit and Accelerator, and definitely invite you guys to come and be a part of that as well. That's it for me. I wanted to keep it short. Wanted to provide an opportunity to open up for Q&A, but also, get your feedback in terms of, if this was helpful, and answer any questions you may have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. That was a great kind of overview. I love some of the things that you had mentioned around, the phrase culture eats strategy, and that, you really have to have the strategy move at the pace of culture. I think those are great kind of ideas to really hold on to in this time of transition. And I think it's very insightful how many, if you hold employees next to customers, how well we know the customers and how little we allow our employees to be multifaceted, complex people in a similar way, right? The 2 segments, and I think that's phenomenal. But enough from me. I really want to open it up. We have a few people joining the call. Just as a reminder, we're recording this. We'll post it on WeWork Labs Insider for the Labs members. Everyone on this call can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom to post questions, and then Jeffrey will ask them. While you're formulating your questions and posting them in the Q&A, I'm curious, Jeffrey, what sort of changes have you seen just in the last few weeks? That guide is going to be very, very helpful. That People Ops Guide we'll share with our members. But I'm curious, with the move to Zoom, with the move to more kind of digital only sort of interactions, whether it's employees or customers in general, how is culture sort of adapting to this new kind of digital or digital only sort of world? What are some of the call outs you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think is most telling, where you're seeing moments where consumers are leading it's, if you think about, there's a case study that we cite, um, Club Quarantine. And D Nice is a popular DJ that started um, a movement where live events started helping people cope or manage through this important time. And it was called Club Quarantine. And this is someone who started, I would say, on the category of wellness. Very different time frame. So if you think, that the business that you were in was one thing, but what this opportunity actually allowed you to do is to pivot in a real moment. And so he pivoted from, not being able to go on the road and, play in clubs and play in corporate events to, well, hey, I'm going to go direct to consumers versus B2B or being hired through someone. And so I think he took that moment from, I think he initially had I think 200,000 followers to where now he has 1.6 million. And so, that's earned media. And he started out, I think, the first night with about 200 people. Then it went to 1,200. Within a week's time, it went to 100,000. And so, as a result of that, obviously he benefits on the back end, where he now has an audience. It's much more direct. He has diversified revenue streams post COVID-19, and he has a fan base. And so when you think about that in terms of how does that play out from a solution standpoint for companies, what I recommend to companies is like, okay, yes, 8 hours a day, typically someone comes into the office, but now you've got a tapped an audience in terms of your employees. What are you doing besides infusing productivity demands or ask? How are you providing wellness opportunities? How are you partnering and importing content to where it's not just Zoom for meetings, but you're also providing, what are best practices from a child care perspective? How are you partnering with, do you know your employee base that may be pregnant? So how do you bring in a B2B content provider on the influencer side that, talks about, being pregnant? So it's these types of things that I think are value adds to where, if you maybe had limited resources to do something in office, where now you have the opportunity to do something in a much more scalable and sustainable way.
That's great. You mentioned right then, the focus on productivity, right, as everything switches to a tool and kind of making sure that employees are delivering as much as they can to kind of keep things afloat. What's your advice to founders or to team managers who, in terms of encouraging and motivating employees instead of this idea of enforcing productivity? How would you counsel a founder or a CEO to, people first mindset, right? To encourage and motivate through this time, which is very high stress, very challenging, very unpredictable, versus just demanding productivity.
Yeah, I think, we wrote a piece, I think it's published on the WeWork platform, but the first signal you want to give your employees is that, we want to listen to you. We want to hear from you. And so if you don't have a system of getting feedback from your employee base, I would say at a bare minimum, that's the first thing you could do. Obviously there are tools for that, but it's as simple as, doing a Google survey, on a weekly basis, because you want to get a pulse of your organization and you want to source ideas and feedback so that, you understand what their pain points are as they go through this. And then you not only want to source what those pain points are, you want to solve for them. And you want to show that, there's the productivity side in terms of tools, but, here's some other things based on 1 or 2 weeks feedback that we've gotten from employee base. And that's, oftentimes an oversight, and it's really, really simple. And it's just a pulse, and you're asking for feedback. And it's really, because we're on Zoom or because we're on some of the productivity software platforms, it's really simple, easy task to do, but makes a significant impact as a whole.
That's great. Thank you. We do have one question from Geld. Any advice you have for a brand new startup in terms of building teams remotely right now? Just starting out, hiring, growing, building. Where do you think that this will go? Will it shut down and turn to local teams, et cetera? So any advice you have around a brand new startup building the remote teams instead of working with existing workforce?
Yeah, I think if you were to look at most P&Ls for companies is, real estate. This may not be friendly from a WeWork perspective, but if the goal or the ambition is to jump in as is, and build a remote team, then I will say that, those 5 things that I mentioned with regards to structure, the strategy, understanding segments, systems and solutions. You're not probably going to be able to pull off all of them, but 2 or 3 out of the 5, I think is really critical. So, think about, structurally, how does it work for your organization? Get feedback as you move this along and establish milestones along the way as to how your remote team is adjusting. And what I've also seen, for people coming out of this, I say, hey, there are going to be some areas where in the past, there may have been a business case for or the desire of making a business case for not coming into the office before it's approved. I think with this, you're going to see, well, that could be done remote, or that can be done from home. And I think the huge part to all of this is building a culture. And it's hard to do when you're not touching and when you're not, in a physical location. So I would say if you're going to go 100% remote, at least set up a quarterly, stand up or all hands where you get in the room with folks. And so, that's a hybrid approach that I've seen work really well. And I would encourage, if not monthly, quarterly, and if it can't be done on a quarterly basis, then, think about how much of the mix of resources that you want to be remote versus on campus.
That's great. And that's a great question too. Thanks, Geld. I think, even taking that one step further, I'm curious if of the 5 sort of pillars from the People Ops framework that you've put forth, how would you advise, mapping the culture, kind of setting the tone? It sounds like Geld is interviewing and hiring and bringing people on in this kind of Which of these do you start with in terms of the systems or the strategy, the segments? How do you kind of approach the interview and the hiring process to really set the tone for the culture so that it can then, be the pace setter?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think inherently, if you're a founder and you've got, growth and, it's what I often hear, specifically for founders is that, and I think you can see it, do you start by building diverse teams? Oftentimes founders hire people that's closest to them within arm's reach. That's cool. It's resourceful, but you're more likely hiring or bringing on people that they can do the same things that you do. And so, that's probably the first opportunity. If you are solo, you have a co-founder, what are like the key values that you want your your organization to reflect. And it's never too early to do that, because I think it'll be a guiding point as to how you build your organization and how you sustain it as you scale, hopefully. And so that's the thing. I think if it's two of you guys, and how do you make sure that the people that you're bringing on board is diverse? Not only just the race identity, but in thinking as well. And then from there, as you grow your team, then it becomes making sure that you have a feedback loop, whether it be formally or informally, and that informs the strategy. And what I mean by that is understanding the journey, whether it's talent acquisition, whether it's onboarding, whether it's engagement, whether it's reward, whether it be compensation, a rewards program, then obviously retention and exit. And so you want to begin to kind of understand that, whether, collecting data points in that. So as your organization matures more, and grows quickly, you want to be able to go back and reflect, whether it be monthly or a quarterly basis on that, so that you're able to go from developing the structure, understanding the segments in terms of your employees, and developing the strategy. And then obviously, once you reach a critical point, you're going to need workplace tools. And those three things should decide on the buy of those tools versus the opposite way.
That's great. Thank you. Just as a quick reminder, y'all can ask questions in the Q&A or ask follow-up questions to anything that's been asked that you want to kind of unpack more. One of the things that I'll tack on, I'm curious, you mentioned two segments for employees, race and identity. I'd be curious if you were trying to help maybe one of the founders map out other segments to consider. What are some of the other segments you would say, think about this? You mentioned thinking, for example, how someone approaches a problem. What are some of the other segments that you would say these are really important for culture beyond race, identity, and thinking? Look at this, look at how your employees are their profile stacked up against these additional segments.
Yeah, no, that's, a good question. The thing I'll say with that is, I get that question, so when we do an assessment, let's say of a larger, more mature organization, we get that question a lot, and, part of the reason they're bringing us in there is to kind of help change and help accelerate that. So I think at the core, the fundamentals, you have to start with, designing and intentionally designing a diverse organization, and then building a more inclusive workplace. And then obviously, out of that, you get to the maturity piece by being able to provide the learning tools and content that are much more personalized, so that you can take someone, what we call level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And so the complexity of that, typically falls, what does diversity mean? Yes, it's gender, there's race, but when you, depending on your organization and how you compete, it can be a diversity of thinking. How are you celebrating those moments as relates to diversity? How are you allowing folks from different socioeconomic backgrounds to be incorporated from an internal perspective? How are you diversifying your recruiting efforts so that everyone doesn't come from the same school, or what some people call pattern matching? And then, those are like the common things, where if you look and you do have some type of recruiting budget, if you're saying, well, we only recruit at these schools, well, That's interesting. Because your consumers or the buyers come from multiple schools. So why wouldn't you want to reflect that? And then if there are gaps for what you consider the tier one, tier two schools, then how do you upskill? Because at some point the well's going to run dry as where you source that talent from. I'll give you an example on the technology side. 2, 3 years ago, folks are getting a lot of money. And we would go in and we talk to some companies and they say, hey, we have no time for culture. We got to put butts in seats. And so, sometimes we'll say you can pay us now or you can pay us later. And so the later piece typically becomes a little painful because yes, you're getting butts in seats, but in most cases there are some values being broken or not being monitored. And so, maybe there's a lawsuit that pops up. Maybe there's a lot of turnover out of one specific segment of your employee base. And so, yes, you may be able to get butts in seats, but how are you keeping those butts in seats as a whole?
I think that's great. I also love what you said around, you adapt to how you're competing, and with everything moving to, again, more virtual, more digital, more of an online engagement, the way that everybody's competing in some form or fashion is changing, which indicates then growing the team, planning out the people operations side of it must adapt because the way you're competing is adapting. I think that's a phenomenal point.
Yeah.
Great. So we'll go ahead and kind of wrap up. We don't have any further questions coming through, but this has been phenomenal. Very, very insightful. I really appreciate you making the People Operations Playbook available to the WeWork Labs members. That's going to be great. Obviously, you're one of the lab's mentors, so you're not going anywhere. You have other articles on Insider that we'll feature and link to. That's phenomenal. If you have any other parting thoughts, I'd love to hear them. I just also want to thank you again for the time. This has been phenomenal.
No, thank you, and appreciate the platform, and just everyone hang in there. Thrive, be agile. Leverage your network and the ecosystem from a technology standpoint. I tend to listen to 1 to 2 webinars on a daily basis just to have a community and get other perspectives so that we all make it out of this.
Yeah, that's a great point. The community is meeting, there's webinars, there's things every day. That's a great point that sometimes just kind of learning is a way to connect. So thank you again for the time. Thank you to everyone who attended. This will be on WeWork Labs Insider, and you'll have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Thank you.